You know, I never actually found the Moosejaw Lodge. And trust me, I looked. I guess I was lucky that Allison had to work for the last few days of the week, and had sent me up to get our room early. Truth be told, I was kind of glad that she wasn't with me. I could already hear her voice in my head. Just look at the map, Patricia. Use Waze, Patricia. Just pull over and let me drive, Patricia. There's backseat driving, and then there's Allison. Being stuck in the car with her is like doing your driving test all over again. And that was the last thing I needed during the drive up. I suppose it's obvious that Allison and I weren't doing so well. There was a time when I was ready to marry her, but over the past 6 years, she'd slowly worn me down. It was the little things at first. Bits of playful criticism that still managed to have a fair bit of bite behind them. Then the bite becomes less subtle. Then you decide you're going to say something, and that's when the argument starts. Rinse and repeat, over and over again. I'd heard about Moosejaw through a friend. I'd mentioned to her that things weren't going so well between Allison and I. And that was when she told me all about where she'd gone to revitalize her own relationship. Look, we all get stressed. That's life, she'd said to me. But you gotta make time for each other. Remind yourselves why you fell in love. I get so preoccupied with work, and my wife gets really busy. We both get stressed, so I know exactly how you feel. My friend told me about this place up north, though. It's a nice little lodge called Moosejaw. You're far away from everything. It's just the two of you, and it's nice. You can just reconnect. I don't think I've seen my wife that happy in a long, long time. Maybe it'll do you and Allison some good, too. I'd been sold. Or at least as sold as I could get. I did love Allison. Even if she was a pain in my ass. And I wanted to set things right. I wanted our relationship to go back to the way it was, before we were constantly yelling at each other and fighting. I missed that. And I would have done anything to get it back. Besides, we could probably both use a vacation. And I loved going up north. My grandfather had had a cottage when I'd been a kid, and I had a lot of fond memories of diving into the cool, clear waters of the lake out behind his cottage. I used to swim and fish for hours on end. Used to. It had been years since I'd been up north, and I missed it. Swimming in the pool at the local YMCA was never the same. My friend was right. I needed a break from life, with or without Allison, and I was willing to do whatever it took to get it. The trees were thick, and it was starting to get late. I had a few missed texts and one missed call from Allison, but I didn't actually bother to read them. I honestly had bigger problems. Waze told me to keep going straight, but I still felt lost. Recalculating, said the voice from the app for the 115th time. Fuck you, I said to the voice, despite the fact that it couldn't hear me at all. I'm not sure how much time I spent driving before I actually saw something through the trees, and I felt a stab of excitement. That must have been it. Moosejaw Lodge. At last, I'd found it. From what I could tell, it was an older building. It looked to be out of place in the forest. It looked more like a high-rise. It had to be about 20 floors high. It also looked nothing like the pictures I'd seen of Moosejaw. I was pretty sure we weren't even near a lake, and Moosejaw was supposed to be on a lake. But appearances can be deceiving, and it was hard to see much past the heavy trees. I turned up the cobblestone driveway and passed under an old iron archway. There was a large roundabout in front of the door, but no other cars as far as I could see. Engraved on some fancy-looking rocks in the middle of the roundabout was the name Hotel Non-DORMIUNT. That wasn't any hotel name I recognized, and I was pretty sure this wasn't the Moosejaw Lodge. Still, I supposed I could at least get directions. What could it hurt, right? There was nowhere really to park, and no sign of a valet. I figured that since I was only going inside for a moment, I could just park out front. No one would mind, right? The doors to the hotel had a brass finish that was cool to the touch. The interior was, well, dated to say the least. The walls were covered in Art Deco, shell-patterned wallpaper with faded brass panels. The furniture was carved wood and looked worn. There was a faint smell of cheap cologne that masked the smell of damp wood in the air. If there had been at least one other soul in sight, I might have said it looked cozy despite the off-putting smell. There was no one, though. Not even a person behind the mahogany reception desk. I approached that desk slowly, looking around for some other trace of human life, and finding nothing. On the receptionist's desk was a small sign that read, "Back in 8 minutes." The handwriting was barely just chicken scratch, but I read it just fine. I checked my phone. Mine was an older iPhone model with a nice waterproof case. I'd gotten it just in case I ever dropped it in the toilet or something stupid, but honestly, I'd never gotten the occasion to see just how well it worked. It was a little past 6. They couldn't be gone for that much longer, right? I saw a service bell on the desk and tapped it twice. No answer. They were probably on break. I could wait a few minutes after all, right? The clock ticked slowly. 6 turned into 6:10, and the receptionist still hadn't come back. This was starting to get annoying. I tapped on the bell again, more urgently this time.
Hello?
The voice was distorted and staticky. It had come from a small speaker on the desk. I hadn't paid much attention to it before, but I could have sworn it was a man's voice, but I wasn't quite sure. "Hello?" I asked. "Hi, I was wondering if you could..."
Hello?
This time it sounded like an old woman. She sounded on the verge of tears. I heard some movement from the speaker as if something was thrashing around. Then I could have sworn I heard a low, animalistic growl. I paused, then dismissed it as a really crappy speaker. "Hi, I was wondering if..."
Name, please,
said the voice on the speaker. This time it was far more high-pitched, like a child speaking. It sounded familiar, but... "Patricia?" I said after a moment. "Patricia Andrews?"
One moment, please.
This time the voice sounded completely inhuman, like one of those videos that claims to show a cat speaking.
Patricia Andrews, checking in. We've been expecting you.
Again, the voice was different. This was the voice of an old man. Slow, deep, and raspy. Expecting me? Why the hell would they be expecting me? Unless... Wait, was this Moosejaw Lodge? Or had Allison called ahead and set something up with them?
380.
Croaked the voice over the speaker. I couldn't make out any details about the voice, but it was clearly different. In the background, I could have sworn I heard a deep, monstrous chuckle.
Enjoy your stay.
Wait, I didn't book a room, I tried to say, but the speaker went dead. Hello? Hello? I didn't book a room here. I hit the bell again, but there was no response. Hello? I felt a hand drop onto my shoulder and let out a scream. I spun around, ready to push off whoever had touched me, and I was greeted with a flash of movement as a figure darted away from me. It looked like a kid. Not a child, but someone who was barely old enough to be a teenager. He held his hands up as if to try and calm me. He wore the red suit of a stereotypical bellboy, complete with the little box-shaped hat, although the suit just seemed far too loose on him. He was barely big enough to fit into it. I noticed that he had a luggage cart at his side, and I recognized my own bags on it. Wait, how the hell did he get into my trunk? He offered a weak, reassuring smile before gesturing politely towards the elevator. I hesitated. He clearly didn't mean any harm, but something felt off about this. "Do you work here?" I asked. The bellboy nodded. "Okay, well, who can I talk to about my reservation here? Because I do not remember making it." The bellboy just shrugged. He had no clue. Why wasn't he speaking to me? "Well, is there a manager I can speak to? Or could you tell me where the receptionist is?" Another shrug. He really didn't know. "I'm sorry, could you just tell me?" He frowned, then shook his head and covered his mouth. His eyes met mine. He was trying to make a point. "Oh. You can't speak, can you?" He nodded. I looked back towards the receptionist desk. We were still alone, and it was clear that there were no answers to my questions to be found. Well, I suppose this would have to do. Maybe Allison had set this up for me. Maybe that was what she texted me about. I really did need to look at those messages. I suppose I could do that once I got to my room. "All right," I finally said. "Lead the way." I followed the bellboy into a rusted old elevator. It shook and rattled all the way up to the 3rd floor. I noticed that the button for the 17th floor had been literally pried out of its place. When the elevator stopped, the door opened with a creak, and the bellboy led me down a long hallway toward my room. I noticed the same Art Deco shell wallpaper along the walls, and a teal blue carpet. The hallway didn't twist or turn, it just went straight. That felt odd to me. Shouldn't there at least be some curves in it? The building had seemed perfectly square when I'd stepped inside. At last, we reached my room. 380 was in clear brass letters on the old wooden door. I watched as the bellboy unlocked it, then quietly let me in. He wheeled the trolley with my luggage inside and set everything down on the bed before placing the key in my hand. He nodded at me, then turned to leave. I really should have tipped the kid. I wish I'd thought to do that. Room 380 was more or less a standard hotel room. There was one king-sized bed in the middle, a small desk with stationery and a couple of metal pens, and a large window that dominated the far wall. Above the bed was a large painting. It depicted a lighthouse on top of a hill. The sky was a surreal pink, and the distant sea shone like aquamarine. Over the desk was another painting, depicting a dark-skinned woman with green hair. Fish swam around her head, some of them moving through her hair. Her eyes were closed and her lips were curled into a small, contented smile. The walls had a different wallpaper than that Art Deco style. It was a mixture of thin blue lines and thick white lines that looked like rolling waves. Tacky, but I suppose it fit with the rest of the room's aesthetic. When I opened the window, I was a little surprised to see a shimmering lake in the sunset. I hadn't thought we were that close to a lake, but I suppose it was nice to be proven wrong. The decor was still very dated, but if nothing else, the room would be a nice place to rest, while I figured out where the hell I was. If Allison had booked this, and if I still needed to actually go to Moosejaw Lodge, maybe we could just have our vacation here. Sure, the hotel was a little rough around the edges, but the bed was quite comfortable. I flopped down onto it and felt it shift under my weight. A waterbed. Hadn't seen one of those in a very long time. I suppose I shouldn't have been surprised to find one in that room. As I lay on the bed, I slipped my phone out of my pocket. 4 unread messages, all of them from Allison. She'd also tried to call me once and had left a voicemail. I unlocked my phone to see what she'd said. It wasn't exactly much. "Are you at Moosejaw yet? I wanted to talk to you about something. Can I call?" Left a voicemail. Well, that didn't exactly leave me with a wealth of information. I was about to check the voicemail when I heard something from what I assumed was the bathroom. It was the sloshing of water back and forth, like something big had just moved. I paused. What the hell was that? The bathtub? Was someone else in the room? No, that couldn't be possible. There was no way I wasn't alone. Maybe it was the sink or the toilet. Shit, was there something wrong with the room? There was only one way to find out. I could check the voicemail later. I got up off the waterbed and headed towards the bathroom. The door was slightly open and I could see a green tile floor waiting for me. Slowly, I pushed the door open and was greeted by the sight of a fairly ordinary bathroom. It was clean and the bathtub sat on the far end of the room. My heart skipped a beat as I saw the woman inside the bathtub, however. I only got a quick glimpse of her. Wet lavender hair clung to her face. Her droopy eyes were emerald green, and as she looked at me, I saw her lips curl into a slight smile. "Jesus, sorry," I cried. I was back out of the bathroom and had the door closed before she could really react. The water in the tub sloshed around. I heard movement against the tile floor, but I was already out of room 380 and headed down the straight hallway. If I was staying there, I needed a new room. I suppose I shouldn't have been surprised that it was double booked, considering that the fucking receptionist couldn't even be bothered to sit at their desk. They had to be back by now. If not, maybe I'd find someone else to help me. Maybe I'd run into that bellboy again. He seemed nice. The rusted old elevator shook and screeched as it took me down to the lobby again. It was just as empty as it was before, although I noticed that the sky outside had gotten darker. The sign from before was still on the receptionist's desk. Back in 8 minutes. 8 minutes, my ass. I'd been in that hotel for at least a half hour, and so far my stay had been anything but pleasant. Oh no. They were coming back right now. I hit the bell as hard as I could, ringing it aggressively. I knew I was being kind of a bitch, but I really didn't care. No one came to attend the desk. The speaker did not crackle to life. I was left at that desk, pounding on the bell like a goddamn idiot, and no one came to help me. I swore under my breath before I finally gave up. I went behind the desk, looking for any trace of the receptionist. There was none. Nothing but that goddamn sign and that goddamn speaker. I didn't have much of a choice but to give up. This was ridiculous. Who the fuck runs a hotel where the receptionist is allowed to fuck off and do whatever they wanted? I considered my options for a moment. I suppose I could have tried to leave. Gone back upstairs, explained my situation to the other guest, gathered my bags and just gotten the hell out of there. Moosejaw couldn't be that much further. Alternatively, I could see if I could find some other staff. There looked to be a small bar in a room adjacent to the lobby. I might be able to find someone in there to help. Plus, that bellboy was probably still around somewhere, and there had to be house cleaning staff. My third option was to go back to the room and try to talk to the current resident. Maybe she could tell me who to call, and she could help me sort this issue out. That might work. The more I thought about taking my chances in searching the bar, the less I liked it. A bartender wouldn't be able to settle a room dispute, and I doubted they'd be privy to the comings and goings of the absent receptionist. It was getting late, and running didn't seem like all that great of an idea either. I didn't want to drive around the narrow, dark roads of northern Canada at night. That felt like it was just asking for trouble. If the woman in room 380 couldn't help, I'd try the bartender. But that was my plan B. The ride back up to the third floor wasn't any more pleasant than the past 2 rides I'd taken on that elevator, but it was thankfully brief. I still had my room key, and I entered the room cautiously. I expected to find the other resident inside, but there was no sign of her. Not at first, anyway. It was just a few steps into the room when I felt the wet carpet under my shoe. A large puddle of water had trickled out from beneath the bathroom door. I listened closely and could hear movement from inside the bathroom. The gentle sloshing of displaced water as the tenant bathed, along with a rhythmic clicking noise, like the noise you'd make to call an animal. In fact, it sounded like the woman in the bath was the one making that noise. My suitcases were untouched, and still sat on that king-sized bed. Outside, the sky looked dark. Almost too dark. Moonlight danced off the surface of that shimmering lake. How long had I been in that hotel? It didn't feel like a long time. Less than an hour, for sure. But time seemed to be moving too fast. It was at that point when I noticed just how barren the room looked. If there was another tenant in there, shouldn't there be some sign that the room had been lived in? Everything looked immaculately clean, like no one had been there at all. There wasn't any sign of someone else's luggage. I frowned before dismissing it. I had bigger problems to worry about. I raised a hand to knock on the bathroom door. The water sloshed and everything went silent. "Hello?" I called. No answer. "My name's Patricia. I think the room got double booked. I got sent up here and honestly had no idea you were in here. I'm really sorry about the mix-up, but do you know anyone we can call to try to sort this out?" Still no response. "Hello?" I called again. I was getting really sick and tired of having to repeat myself. "Hello?" said the voice from the other end. Her voice was strained and a bit breathy. The woman in the tub clicked at me. Fresh water spilled out from under the door and soaked my shoes. I took a step back. "Come in." "Are you sure it's okay?" I asked. Last I checked, she was naked in the tub. "Do you have a towel on or something?" "Come in." More urgent this time. I suppose she wanted to speak face to face. Whatever. This day was already weird. A conversation with some chick in a bathtub would not be the strangest thing that had happened to me. I reached for the doorknob and opened the bathroom door once more. The woman sat upright in the tub. It probably sounds wrong to say that I expected her to be naked, but I did, and she was stark naked. She wasn't quite standing. She gripped the side of the tub and looked at me with wide eyes, and a massive grin that was split from ear to ear. Water trickled out of the overflowing tub and onto the floor, flooding the bathroom. I noticed that her skin seemed strange. It seemed to shimmer with an unnatural purple hue in the light, and there was something off about her growing, toothless smile. I saw marks on her neck, like slashes or gills on a fish. I saw them open and shut, and the sight of it sent a shiver through me. "Hello?" she rasped, and as she spoke, I caught a glimpse of the teeth that were concealed behind her faded pink lips. There were countless rows of razor-sharp teeth. They reminded me of a shark's teeth. Her green eyes had a slitted pupil, and I saw her rear back for just a split second before she pounced. The thing that leapt at me from the bathtub was not human. Not even fucking close. As she leapt from the water and tore towards me, using her arms to quickly drag herself across the wet ground, I saw that her top half was human enough. Her bottom half, though? That was another thing entirely. Shimmering purple scales caught the light, and her muscular lower half ended in a wide, Y-shaped fin. The wet body of the mermaid slapped against the tile as she came for me, and I only had a moment to scream before I slammed the door once again. I heard a thud as the mermaid slammed against the door, and I heard her curse at me in some language I didn't quite recognize. The door shook on its hinges as she struck again. Water spilled out from beneath the door, although it seemed to be coming even faster now. I stumbled backwards towards the waterbed. I knew that I needed to run. I needed to get the fuck out of that room, but the thought had not yet registered as an action. From the corner of my eye, I noticed the view from outside my window had changed, as had its location. Where my window had once been, there was now just a plain wall, with the same wave-like wallpaper, and a picture of a serene lakeside at night. The very same lakeside that I had seen mere moments before. I stared at it in disbelief, before noticing that the window was now behind the bed. Its size had not changed, but the view had. Instead of a lakeside, there was now a lighthouse on top of a hill. The sky was moonlit, and that moonlight shone beautifully off the water. Water that was slowly rising above the windowsill. It took me a few moments to process what I was seeing. Was the hotel sinking? How the fuck did an entire hotel just sink? Why was the hotel in a position where it could sink? When the fuck had the hotel changed its location? The urgent pounding on the bathroom door distracted me from my inability to comprehend why the hotel was sinking. The water was slowly filling the room up, and was lapping at the top of my sneakers now. I needed to get out of there, and fast. I went for the door again. Water splashed with my every footstep, and I didn't notice it trickling out from between the edges of the hotel room's door. I only managed to open it a crack, and I'm amazed I didn't get thrown back by the sheer, unstoppable force of the water pushing through. It came immediately and poured into the room by the gallon. My clothes were immediately soaked by ice-cold salt water. My vision was obscured, and it took everything I had to not let the door swing open and allow the flood to rush in unchecked. I braced myself against the door, but my shoes had no grip on the soaking wet hotel room floor. It took everything I had to force the door shut again, and by the time I managed to do that, the water was almost at my knees. With the door closed, I stumbled back and fell flat on my ass. The mermaid behind the bathroom door pounded on it urgently, as if to remind me that she was still there, and still very much interested in murdering me. Her adamant pounding on the door asked me if I too was interested in my murder at her hands. My answer was no. I didn't particularly want to die. It didn't look like I had a lot of other options at that moment, though. The room was still flooding, and drowning wasn't exactly going to leave me any better off than being killed by the mermaid would. I saw water dripping in from the corners of the window frame. On the other side of it, the water level was rising fast. It now covered over half of the window, and I could have sworn that I saw shapes moving in the darkness beneath the water. Shadowy figures who dared themselves closer to the window, then darted away. I could see their movements, though, and I could only vaguely make out the shape of them. I knew what they were. Mermaids. My heart raced in my chest. The mermaid in the bathroom pounded on the door, and this time, I heard the wood splinter. Shit. The bathroom door had bulged outwards, although only slightly. It was clear that the mermaid was breaking through, though. I probably only had a few more minutes until she was out, and I was fucked. I needed to find some way to defend myself. I needed to find it right then and there. I looked at my luggage on the waterbed. The water that had flooded my room gently lapped at the top of the bed, and I waded over to it before climbing on top of it. I went through my mental inventory of what I'd packed in my mind. Nothing really struck me as a viable weapon, unless I could think of a way to kill a mermaid with the clothes I'd packed. The mermaid slammed against the door again. The door bulged further outward. The center had split open. I heard a triumphant clicking from the other side of it. I was running out of options here. God damn it, if only I had a knife or something. Anything sharp. That was when my eyes settled on the desk. The stationery was wet and useless, but there were still a couple of pens on the desk. It wasn't much. Hell, I didn't like my chances in the slightest. I didn't exactly have anything else, though. The bathroom door splintered as the mermaid crashed through it. Her powerful tail whipped around as she set her eyes on me. Her rictus grin grew wide once more. "Hello?" she snarled. I was out of time. I hurled one of my suitcases at her as she prepared to pounce again. She leapt just as I threw it and crashed into it. The mermaid knocked it aside with sheer momentum, but sailed past me harmlessly and landed on the waterbed. By the time she'd hit it, I'd already leapt back into the air, and was moving to snatch the pen up as fast as I could. I saw the mermaid struggle to maintain her balance on the bed. Her eyes were trained on me. Her tail scrunched up behind her like a spring, and prepared to launch her at me again. I can't say I was ready, but I was as ready as I could possibly get. When she came, I had enough time to move. The mermaid slammed into the wall behind where I'd been. More water poured out from the hole she'd left in the drywall. The impact didn't stun her for long. The water splashed around her as she clawed at me. I tried to keep my distance away from her, but she caught me by the arm, and with impressive strength pulled me toward her. Her nails dug into my flesh, and before I could react, I felt her teeth sinking into my shoulder. I know I was screaming, and I would have collapsed if the wall did not keep me upright. The mermaid put her weight down on me, pinning me up against the wall as she tore a chunk out of my shoulder. I took the first opening I could and drove the pen into her cheek. It tore through her skin with more difficulty than I'd anticipated, but she drew back and snarled in rage. The pen was torn from my hand, and I managed to push her off of me. I watched as she pawed stupidly at the pen, trying to pull it out of her. She bit down on its metal barrel, no doubt damaging it beyond repair, but her attention was torn away from me. Clutching my bleeding shoulder, I braced myself against the wall and managed to kick out at her. I caught her in the chin and sent her backwards into the water. That may have been a mistake. The water was almost waist deep now, and I saw her spin around to right herself before shooting at me with terrible speed. She caught me by the leg and pulled me toward her. I felt the bone in my leg snap from the force at which she tugged me, but I didn't have time to scream before I was dragged beneath the surface. I felt the floor of the hotel room on my back as she pinned me down, trying to drown me as punishment for wounding her. I could only see the dark shape of her above me, and felt her nails digging into my neck. The broken pen still jutted out of her cheek, and I desperately grabbed at it. I managed to tear only a single jagged part out of it. I had no idea if what I was going to do would work, but I drove it into her stomach. The mermaid jerked about suddenly, clearly in pain, and pulled away from me sharply. The broken pen was again jerked out of my hand, but the dark blood I saw in the water confirmed that I had wounded her. I broke the surface, unsure where the mermaid had gone, but knowing I hadn't killed her. The salt water stung my wounds, but I at least had enough time to limp to the waterbed, which was now starting to become submerged. I grunted in pain as I dragged myself up on top of it, and looked around desperately for any sign of the mermaid. The water outside the window had almost completely overtaken it. I could see the figures pressing themselves up against the window. Pretty faces, just like those of the mermaid I was currently dealing with. I felt a pit in my stomach, knowing that there was an audience to my little gladiatorial match with one of their sisters. Speaking of which, I was unarmed again, and that mermaid was probably good and pissed off by now. She would be back in the fray any moment now. My arm brushed against one of my bags, and I hastily picked it up and unzipped it. I had no idea what I expected to find in there, aside from clothes and maybe some toiletries, but I really was out of options. The first thing I managed to pull out was a Pride t-shirt, and I had a feeling I wasn't going to be able to kill the mermaid with that. I dug for something else, and came up with only a couple more shirts. A sudden sound of movement beneath the water caught my attention, and made me turn my head towards one corner of the room, where the desk had been. In what little light I had left, I saw the shape of the mermaid beneath the water, ready to pounce again, and I had barely a second to react before she came for me. She sprang out of the water and missed me by less than an inch. She slammed against the window, cracking the glass and sending panic through my spine. Her heavy body slammed against the waterbed, and she struggled against the shifting mass to right herself. I snatched up the closest thing I could find, the Pride shirt, and leapt onto her back before she could get into any position to attack me again. I had no idea if it would work, but I gripped the shirt tight in both hands and wrapped it around her throat before I pulled as tight as I could. The mermaid thrashed beneath me. Her hands tried to pull at the shirt, then tried to claw at me. She was a hell of a lot stronger than I was, and I didn't have her pinned for long. Her heavy body rolled on top of me, crushing me into the waterbed. I could barely breathe and water was pooling on top of me, but I just pulled the shirt even tighter. I could feel her thrashing, and between the splashing our struggle caused, I could hear her gasping for air. Underwater, she could breathe just fine through her gills. But she wasn't underwater now. No. The water had only just barely begun to cover the bed, and with her on her back, with me beneath her, her gills were useless. I pulled my makeshift garrote tighter and sucked in a gasp for breath. I managed to move my head over the mermaid's shoulder to allow myself to breathe while I strangled her. Her nails raked my scalp, sending fresh blood into the water and leaving stinging gashes on my skin. None of it made me let up, though. I was running off sheer adrenaline and nothing else. I could hear desperate pounding on the window and looked up to see the other mermaids watching with concern. The mermaid on top of me was growing weaker. Her animalistic struggles were beginning to lose their fury. She was fading fast. A few dying clicks escaped her. Perhaps an attempt to plead with her sisters to help her. Help didn't come, though. Not for her. "Hello?" I heard her rasp. Maybe that was her attempt at pleading with me, begging me to live and let live. Honestly, I didn't give a shit. "Goodbye," I growled. Her body jerked weakly. Her fingers brushed against my bloody scalp, but she was too weak to leave another mark on me. She twitched and tried to suck in a breath. Her chest rose, then slowly fell. Her body began to go limp, and I kept my grip on the shirt as tight as I could, even as I felt her movements begin to stop. Her tail swished weakly in the water. I could see her gills trying to flare beneath the shirt. I just pulled it tighter and tighter, wringing the life out of her, feeling her dying against me, until at last I felt her lose consciousness entirely. The mermaid lay on top of me, heavy and dead as I kept my grip on the shirt tight. I didn't want to risk letting go, only for her to get back up and start the fight all over again. Every part of my body burned with the worst pain I'd ever felt. I was not equipped to keep fighting this thing, and I refused to let my one shot at killing it slip away. Not until I was sure. The water lapped gently at the side of my face as the waterbed slowly began to flood. The mermaid lay on top of me, no longer breathing and no longer alive. I loosened my grip. Only a little. She did not start to breathe again. Nor did she move. She was dead. She had to be. With the last of my strength, I rolled the dead mermaid off of me. She fell off the waterbed and bobbed beneath the water, before she floated back up to the surface and sat there. Her eyes were half-lidded. Her mouth hung open in a final scream. Her gills didn't move. She was gone. I lay back on the sinking waterbed. I looked at the crack in the window. It was wider than it had been before. Water was trickling in through it, and the rest of the mermaids waited patiently. They looked at me with scowls of rage, no doubt wanting their shot at me, and I knew that they would get it. There was no trace of sky anymore. The hotel had sank deep beneath the surface of the water, and there was no going back now. I knew I couldn't fight the rest of the mermaids off. I was going to die here. Plain and simple. I was not happy with that idea. In truth, I was terrified of it. But there really wasn't any more I could do about it. As the room flooded, I lay on the waterbed in agony. I thought about Allison. I missed her. As awful as she could be sometimes, I really did miss her. I'd loved her once. I guess I still did. Maybe I should have married her after all. Allison. Oh shit, the voicemail. I reached into my pocket and took out my phone. I guess I finally got a chance to use that waterproof case. I was a little amazed that the damn thing still turned on. Slowly, I opened my voicemail. If nothing else, I could hear her voice one last time. The voicemail began to play, and I listened as I looked up at the ceiling. Hey, Patricia, look. This isn't exactly easy for me to say. It's been a good 6 years, and I don't resent you or anything. I know what you're trying to do with Moosejaw, and I really do appreciate it. She paused, then sighed. But I know that you're wasting your time. When you told me what you wanted to do, I really tried to get excited about it. I really, really did. Maybe a few years ago I would have, but... fuck it, I'll just say it. The thought of having to spend a vacation alone with you, it makes me unhappy. I wish there were some other way to say it, and I tried so hard to get excited. I tried so hard to want to renew what we had, but the truth is, I don't. I don't want to go on some romantic getaway with someone I don't love anymore. I'm sorry. But I thought it was better to tell you before. I'll pay you back for whatever you spent to bring me up there, but when you get back home, I'll be gone. I hope everything works out for you and whatever comes next for you. I really do. But I won't be a part of it. Goodbye. The voicemail ended just like that. And I lay there on the waterbed, processing everything I just heard and trying to make sense of it. I'm not sure if it was the flooding hotel room or my own tears, but my face was wet. I heard a thud as one of the mermaids slammed against the glass. I watched the crack grow larger. More water trickled in. Allison had left me. Another slam against the glass. My phone slipped out of my hands. I didn't see where it went. I didn't care either. I just watched the crack on the glass grow larger and larger, feeling what I knew were tears streaming down my cheeks as my death prepared to shatter the glass that separated us. Just a few more seconds. I wish she talked to me. I wish she told me before I left. I wish I could have at least tried to beg her not to go, or told her that we could have worked it out. I wish things could have gone differently. Allison. The glass shattered, and the force of the water threw me like a ragdoll from the bed. I could see the shapes of mermaids coming for me as the room flooded. I felt their hands grabbing me and their teeth sinking into my flesh, tearing it away from my bones. The last thing I heard before I was completely submerged were my own pained screams as my limbs were torn from my body and my ribcage was ripped apart to get at my organs. I hope Allison is doing well. I really do. I'm not up to much these days. I haven't been to any Pride meetups in Toronto. Actually, I don't think I'll ever make it back to Toronto. But I found a new group to hang out with. They're really alright once you get to know them. We swim beneath the lighthouse on the cliff. And sometimes, when someone books room 380 at the hotel Non-DORMIUNT, we get visitors. I like it when we get visitors. My new friends and I could really use the meat. Become a channel member today for early access, bonus videos, and special emojis only available to members. Check out the description below or click the join button for more info. If you'd like another way to help support the channel, please consider joining my Patreon page at patreon.com/JordanGroupeHorror. As a patron, you'll get access to bonus videos and content. You'll be credited at the end of every video going forward. And if you decide to stay for 3 months, I'll name a character after you, which will be featured in a Hollow's End story. Links to join the Patreon are in the description. Thanks everyone for listening. Please like, subscribe, and comment to help the channel continue to grow. And see you again next time at 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Hope you have a great night.